One more day. One more day. We have an opportunity to put an end to a presidency that's divided this nation. Tomorrow, we can put an end to a president that has failed to protect this nation. And tomorrow, we can put an end to a president that has fanned the flames of hate all across this country.
Do you want to be represented by a career politician who hates you, or by an outsider who will defend you like you have never been defended before? No administration has done more in the first 3.5 years than we have.
It's time for Donald Trump to pack his bags and go home. It's go time. It's go time.
They'll win the whole thing, and we'll send them a signal like they've never seen before. We are going to win 4 more years in the White House.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. President Trump and Joe Biden are making their final pitches to voters before Election Day. And like nearly everything else in this race, things could not look more different when you compare the campaigns. President Trump is flying around the country to hold packed rallies in key battleground states, much like the ones he held ahead of the 2016 election. You can see his 5 stops here in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina, all states he won last time around. Meanwhile, Joe Biden started Monday in Ohio, where his team is seeing some last-minute hope and is spending the rest of the day in western Pennsylvania. Unlike the president, Biden is holding smaller drive-in rallies to allow for more distance between attendees. The different approaches to the campaign trail highlight a divide in this election. Here's a look at our CBS News Battleground Tracker. Joe Biden holds a more than 2-to-1 lead nationally among those who have already voted, while President Trump is doing almost equally as well among those planning to vote on Election Day. So where does that leave things? In our team's baseline scenario, Biden has a narrow electoral college edge with plenty of toss-ups and lean states that could easily swing either direction. For President Trump to win, Republicans will need to see a turnout surge on Election Day to counteract their early vote deficit. That scenario looks something like this, leading to a narrow Trump victory. But it doesn't take much for it to break the other way, illustrating Republicans' precarious position. If Tuesday's turnout is decreased by an average of 3 percentage points from the baseline, Biden could be headed for an electoral college landslide. Caitlin Huey-Burns and Nikole Killion join me now. Caitlin is CBSN's political reporter with us from the battleground state of Pennsylvania, and Nikole is a CBS News correspondent reporting from Biden headquarters in Delaware. All right, ladies, this is it. We can now begin counting down in hours now, no longer days. Nikole, let me start with you. With those scenarios I just mentioned in mind, I want to start with how the campaigns are feeling right now. You spoke to Biden campaign chair and Delaware Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester this afternoon. Let's go ahead and listen to some of that.
Both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the entire campaign are feeling confident but not complacent. We are not taking one person or one vote for granted. And so we're going to work very hard till the very, very last vote is cast. And, you know, we're feeling good, but the stakes are so high. We're just looking at the massive numbers of people who are voting early and are engaged, and that gives us a good feeling. Then even the fact that there are states in play that we did not expect to be maybe in play in the very beginning of this race makes us feel good. But again, the real goal is to make...
So, Nikole, help us understand that position of confident but not complacent, as she said, and how that compares to the Trump campaign at this point.
Well, certainly, as you can imagine, not just for the Biden campaign, but Democrats across the board. 2016 is still in the rear view mirror, but also in the back of the minds of, this campaign and the party as a whole. And so while there is a cautious sense of optimism that maybe this time will be different, they know what happened in 2016. And so the campaign does not want to rest on its laurels. It doesn't want to take any voter for granted out there. And so really between now and Election Day tomorrow, that is the message that they are trying to drive home, that anyone who has not yet voted, they want them to get out to the polls and vote. Because as you know, with elections, it is a turnout game. Certainly the Trump campaign is really banking that their supporters, their base, will really show up in a big way tomorrow. Democrats have banked a lot of their votes already, but they still need that turnout to make it to the finish line. And so that's why you hear that confident but not complacent. They want to think that they are in the driver's seat here, that they could possibly bring this home tomorrow night. But on the same token, they know that it is a heavy lift, and so they need each and every person possible to get out there and vote. And so that's part of the message that you were hearing there from the Congresswoman.
Well, Caitlin, as we mentioned, you are with us from Pennsylvania, one of the most important states in this election, and you actually spent the morning watching voters line up to cure or fix issues with their ballot. Now, here's some of what they told you.
How many calls do you think that you have received from various people telling you that you need to correct your ballot?
In total, I counted with my husband 63. Up until I just got off the phone with him, and I just got another block call, so I already know what it is about. And my thing is, you know what? It's all right. I'm already here. So we're all here to do the same thing. I'm going to say we're the complex line. We had a little complication, but we're going to go ahead and fix this hiccup.
All I can say is double check, 10 times, because I have no idea what I could have done wrong, because I did double check, but something's wrong, and I really appreciate the fact they called us. I'll do anything, even if I have to stand out here all day. I'm not leaving until I get the vote.
Caitlin, I have to say, it is really inspiring to see the level of commitment on the part of these voters to get these issues addressed. How big was that crowd of people to fix their ballots, and how important is this process to the outcome of the race in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, Elaine, we were in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which is about an hour north of where I am here in Philadelphia. It's a really key county, a county that Hillary Clinton won by just fewer than 3,000 votes. So when voters say every ballot counts, they really mean it in that area. In Pennsylvania, about 3 million absentee ballots have gone out. And where we were, voters had been notified that either they didn't fill out the ballot correctly, meaning they didn't sign it correctly, or didn't have didn't put a date on it. Some voters said that they never received their absentee ballots, so they were going to make sure that they could fill out a ballot. But every kind of voter that we talked to said that they were determined to stand in that line. People started lining up at 7 in the morning, and we were there for about 6 hours or so, and there was a steady stream of people the whole entire time waiting to be able to fix their ballot because it mattered so much to them. And we talked to, most of them said that they were supporting Biden that we talked to, but we also talked to Trump voters who were voting absentee. So even as the president kind of slams absentee voting and criticizes that effort, his voters here in Pennsylvania are still using that as a way to vote. But as we've talked about before, we've been finding, especially here on the ground in Pennsylvania, which is such a key battleground state this time around, that voters are really obsessed about how to get their ballot in to make sure they count. They've been watching every tutorial on social media, trying to figure out ways. The woman that you played a clip from, she said that she had just forgotten to write the date on it, and she said, it's worth it that they contacted me because this was an important election to her.
Yeah, it really is so heartening to see people so enthusiastic about participating in our democracy. Let's bring into this conversation Liz Goodwin. She is the Boston Globe's Deputy Washington Bureau Chief. She is with us from Tampa, Florida. Hi there, Liz. So we're talking about Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is not going to begin processing mail ballots until Election Day Tuesday. Of course, they're in Florida. That is a state infamous for its role in the bitterly fought legal battle in the 2000 presidential race. What is the campaign like in its final day there? What's the state doing to prevent a slower vote count this election?
Yes, Elaine, it's kind of ironic that we could all be looking to Florida to get some early signals about what is actually happening tomorrow, but it seems like that could be the case. Florida election officials say they've made great strides since 2000 in terms of fixing any issues, and the key thing about Florida is they can count ballots that are coming in, mail-in ballots, 22 days before Election Day, which is something that they are not allowing people to do in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin due to some kind of partisan bickering over that. So that means that we're going to actually know how these mail-in ballots and the early voting broke out probably within an hour after the polls close tomorrow, barring some kind of unforeseen circumstance. So Florida could end up actually kind of giving people a sign of what's going on tomorrow in terms of, is Biden ahead, is Trump ahead? The caveat for that, huge caveat, is that if it's very close here, which it often is, and the polls are suggesting it's going to be again, then that doesn't really give people that clarity they're looking for tomorrow, because close elections, it takes a really long time to get reliable results out. And, there could even be, God forbid, a recount if it's close enough. But there is a scenario where Florida is actually kind of showing people what could happen tomorrow and which way the nation is leaning.
Right, 29 electoral college votes at stake in the Sunshine State, and polls close there at 8 p.m. Is that right? 8 p.m. Eastern time?
Yeah, from 7 to 8. The last polls are 8 p.m.
All right, well, Nicole Axios is reporting that President Trump has told confidants that he will declare victory Tuesday night if it looks like he's quote unquote ahead, even if the Electoral College still hinges on large numbers of uncounted votes. So, Nicole, what is the reality here? Does declaring victory actually mean anything if a number of votes are still outstanding? And how are the campaigns preparing for a potential post-election fight?
Well, the Biden campaign really is trying to get ahead of that prospect, and so they did hold a call with reporters today that they did broadcast publicly where Biden's campaign manager in essence said under no circumstance will the president be declared a victor tomorrow night, simply because that's just not how the process works. I mean, typically speaking, with any election, it's not decided in one night, and while many times we may have a projection or a sense of who might ultimately win, you still have a number of votes to count, whether it be the absentee ballots, overseas ballots, and usually it takes days, a couple of weeks to get those finalized for the states ultimately to certify those results, and that, in fact, is how the winner is officially declared. So the Biden campaign really wants to lay that out so that people understand, someone can't just get up and call themselves the winner and that's it. So you really saw them today try to get ahead of that messaging, and they are braced for the prospect of a fight should this become a protracted battle. So far, they feel very encouraged by the way, absentee ballots and mail-in ballots have been handled. They feel that for the most part, any problems thus far have been relatively minimal, and they hope that that stays that way. But certainly, with the president saying he may send his lawyers in, depending on what the results are, they too are ready with a full arsenal. They have observers who will be watching what happens at the polls. They have their own army of attorneys at the ready to respond if, in fact, this does turn into a legal challenge. So they are ready, certainly, to go head-to-head with the president if it comes to it. But their hope, in a best-case scenario, is that this will be a decisive result, hopefully in their favor, is what they would like to see tomorrow night. And so, again, that's why they keep reiterating this message that they want to see their base turn out tomorrow.
Well, Caitlin, CBS News has learned that President Trump is planning to host an election night party at the White House, where more than 400 guests have been invited, although it's unlikely they will all attend. Now, Washington, D.C. is currently prohibiting gatherings of more than 50 people as part of their coronavirus restrictions. But what does that plan tell us about the Trump administration and campaign's approach to the pandemic?
Well, it's consistent with the way the president has been campaigning, especially here in the final stretch. And remember, going back to the Republican National Convention, the idea was not to focus on the pandemic at all, to try to portray this sense of the country having already gotten over it. Of course, we know the pandemic is very much still going on, and we're actually seeing increases in cases, especially in the Midwest, areas that the president needs to win, areas where he's going to have to ramp up his vote on Election Day. This is a campaign that has been very much focused on the Election Day vote, so that could be a risky move heading into that. We've seen him on the campaign trail with a packed schedule, hitting several states in a day at times, holding big rallies with virtually no social distancing, very little mask wearing. And the whole theme of those events is to portray a country that has already gotten past the pandemic, even though the president himself, of course, was hospitalized for COVID-19. It's an explicit contrast with the way that the Biden team has been campaigning, a more limited schedule, though ramping up events in the final days. They have both been barnstorming around Pennsylvania, where I am, those 20 electoral votes up for grabs here. Both campaigns say it's a closer race than let's on. The pandemic is center stage for Joe Biden, who said last night while campaigning that Trump is the virus. That is a campaign line in the closing days. For the Trump campaign, it's been a focus on the economy, returning back to the way things were before the pandemic. For the Biden team, it's all about making this a referendum on Trump's handling of the coronavirus.
Well, Liz, I want to ask you about one of the starkest polling patterns we have seen in this election. What can you tell us about the expected historic gender gap?
Yes, well, the gender gap was very big last time around. In 2016, it was tied for the largest gender gap in 40 years. So this is a trend that already began 4 years ago with Trump versus Hillary, and it's just gotten bigger since then. Women have really driven a lot of the Democratic gains in the past few years, in 2018, in the midterms. And nationally, it appears that Trump has lost even some more women, especially working class white women who he did well with last time around. He's lost some ground with them, and that's creating an even larger gender gap. And on the flip side of that gender gap, he's made some gains with Hispanic men in polls, for example, though not with Latino women at all. So that's also kind of drawing the genders farther apart in polls, and some polls have the gap up to like 18 points, which is an outlier. It probably won't be that big, but it's looking like it's going to be another historic chasm between the genders.
All right, well, Caitlin Huey-Burns, Nikole Killion, and Liz Goodwin, we are almost there. It really will be an election unlike any other. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.